3 weeks before my wedding, my fiancé looked across my mother's Thanksgiving table and said, "For the first time in my life, I finally know what it feels like to have a family I'm proud to introduce." Everyone smiled because they thought she was talking about healing. I smiled too because at that exact moment I still believed her parents had spent years humiliating, controlling, and rejecting her. What nobody at that table knew was that her real mother was sitting 90 miles away with an unopened wedding invitation she had mailed back to herself after our address was marked "Return to Sender." Her father had spent 34 years maintaining public schools and had saved $10,000 because he still hoped his only daughter might let him help with the wedding. My fiancée had told me both of them were emotionally abusive and wanted nothing to do with us. She had told them the wedding had been postponed indefinitely. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, she announced that her parents had finally apologized and would meet my family at an engagement dinner. I should have been relieved. Instead, I was staring at a photograph on my phone of the wealthy hotel executive and his wife she planned to introduce as mom and dad. By the time that dinner arrived, her real parents were sitting in the restaurant parking lot waiting for one text from me. I did not expose her because I wanted revenge. I exposed her because I needed to know whether the woman I loved would tell the truth when the lie no longer had anywhere left to hide. My name is Owen Barrett. I was 38 when this happened, and I live in Denver, Colorado. My family owns a commercial landscaping and snow management company that my father started with one pickup truck and a used mower in 1989. We are not private jet rich, but the business has done well. We maintain office campuses, hospitals, apartment communities, and several high-end hotels around Colorado. I joined after college, expanded the commercial side, and eventually took over daily operations when Dad stepped back. My parents, Walter and Denise Barrett, still live in the same brick house in Lakewood where my younger sister and I grew up. Dad could have bought something much bigger years ago. He says he already knows where the light switches are. Mom spent 30 years teaching elementary school and treats Thanksgiving with the seriousness some people reserve for federal elections. You arrive hungry, you leave with leftovers, and you do not schedule anything else that day unless you want your name quietly removed from the family prayer list. We were close without being perfect. Dad could be stubborn. Mom worried professionally. My sister, Kendra, knew exactly which childhood stories to tell if she wanted to embarrass me. But there was one thing I had never questioned. If one of us was hurting, the others showed up. That was why I believed Tessa when she told me her family had not. I met Tessa Lane at a Hotel E fundraiser in downtown Denver. She was 34, worked as a senior brand strategist for a luxury hospitality group, and had the kind of presence that made a crowded room reorganize itself around her without her asking. She was funny, observant, and much less impressed by my job than most people at those events. When I told her my company handled snow removal for 3 of her firm's properties, she said, "So you're the reason executives can wear loafers during a blizzard." I told her that was exactly our mission statement. We talked for 2 hours. I called her the next morning. For the first 6 months, dating Tessa felt easy in a way my previous relationships had not. She liked Sunday breakfast with my parents. She remembered Dad's birthday without Facebook reminding her. She helped my mother carry dishes without performing helpfulness for applause. She went hiking with Kendra, tolerated my uncle's endless stories, and once drove across Denver during a snowstorm to sit with me in urgent care after I sliced my palm at a job site. I trusted her because trust had never felt like a risk around her. When she talked about her parents, the story came slowly. Her mother, Carol, had been critical about everything growing up. Clothes, weight, grades, friends. Her father, Martin, controlled money and expected obedience. They lived in a small town in southern Wyoming, according to Tessa, and had never respected the career or life she built after leaving home. "I spent my whole 20s trying to become somebody they could not reduce," she told me one night. We were eating takeout on my couch. Eventually, I realized distance was the only thing that worked. I asked whether they knew where she lived. "Probably." "Do you speak at all?" "Almost never." "Would you want them at a wedding someday?" Her face changed, not anger, sadness. "No." I did not push. My parents had taught me that family mattered, but they had also taught me that nobody earns permanent access by biology alone. I believed Tessa had done the difficult thing and protected herself. When I proposed the following spring on a trail outside Telluride, she cried before I finished the question. My mother cried when we called. Dad opened a bottle of bourbon he had apparently been saving for exactly that phone call. Kendra screamed loud enough through speakerphone that hikers 20 yards away congratulated us. Tessa hugged me that night and whispered, "I cannot believe I get to belong to this. I thought she meant our future." Looking back, I think she meant my family. Wedding planning began the way wedding planning always begins. Romantic ideas followed immediately by invoices. We chose a historic hotel in downtown Denver for the ceremony and reception. Tessa loved the ballroom because the windows faced the mountains and the staircase looked dramatic without looking like we were trying too hard, which was apparently a distinction I had never known existed. My mother offered to host the rehearsal dinner. Dad offered a fixed amount toward the wedding, no conditions. I covered most of the rest because I could afford to, and Tessa insisted on contributing from her savings. Her parents remained the quiet absence in every plan. The wedding coordinator asked for parental names for the program. Tessa wrote, "Bride, escorted by herself." The photographer asked whether we needed a family portrait list for her side. Tessa said no. My mother asked once whether she should reserve 2 seats in case they changed their minds. Tessa's answer was immediate. "Please don't. Empty chairs would feel worse." Mom squeezed her hand and never asked again. The first thing that bothered me happened at our engagement party in September. A colleague of Tessa's named Miranda asked where she grew up. Tessa laughed and said, "Mostly outside Boulder." I knew that was not true. She had told me Wyoming. Later in the car, I asked about it. "It's easier," she said. "If I say a tiny Wyoming town, people spend 10 minutes asking horse questions. Which town was it again?" She looked out the window. "Outside Cheyenne." That answer did not match the town name she had once mentioned, but it was minor enough that I felt ridiculous noticing. A month later, another small thing. We were completing paperwork for an apartment renovation in the condo we would share after the wedding, and the management office needed a copy of her identification. Her legal name was listed as Teresa Morgan Lane. I had never heard Morgan. "Family name?" I asked. "My mother's maiden name." She answered quickly. "I dropped it socially years ago." Again, plausible. Again, small. I let it go. Then Thanksgiving happened. Mom's table had 21 people that year. My parents, Kendra and her husband, cousins, an aunt, my grandmother, 2 neighbors who had nowhere else to go, and Tessa. Mom had put a small place card beside Tessa's plate that said "Future Barrett" in gold marker. Tessa took a photograph and posted it with the caption, "Sometimes the family you choose teaches you what family was supposed to feel like." Everyone found it touching. I did too. During dessert, my grandmother asked whether Tessa's parents knew she was getting married. The whole table quieted. Grandma was 87 and had reached the age where social caution was something other people handled. Tessa smiled sadly. "They know." "And they're not coming?" "No." Grandma shook her head. "Their loss." Tessa looked around the table, eyes shining. Honestly, for the first time in my life, I finally know what it feels like to have a family I'm proud to introduce. My mother reached across and touched her hand. That sentence made me love Tessa more. 3 days later, it became the sentence I could not stop hearing. The discovery began with a wedding invitation. Our coordinator emailed because one invitation had been returned without reaching the recipient. Carol and Martin Morgan, 417 Ridgeview Drive, Fort Collins. I stared at the address. Fort Collins was not Wyoming. It was 70 miles north of Denver. Who are Carol and Martin Morgan? I asked Tessa that evening. She was standing at our kitchen counter working on seating assignments. For one fraction of a second, she froze. Then she said, "My parents. They live in Fort Collins?" "Now they do." "I thought they lived near Cheyenne." "They moved." "When?" "A while ago." She sighed. "Owen, why does this matter?" "It doesn't." The invitation came back. "Good." The word was too fast. "Good? I told you I don't want them there." "Then why did we send one?" "Your mom thought it would be the gracious thing." That was true. Mom had suggested mailing one invitation with no pressure attached. Tessa had eventually agreed. "Do you want me to throw it away?" I asked. "Yes." She walked over, picked up the envelope, and dropped it into the kitchen trash herself. No hesitation. The next morning, I pulled it out. "I wish I could give you a noble reason." I cannot. Something felt wrong. Maybe it was the address. Maybe the way she said good. Maybe the year of tiny inconsistencies finally became heavy enough to notice. The envelope was still sealed. Red postal markings showed it had been returned because the addressee had supposedly moved. But the return sticker was strange. The handwritten forwarding information underneath had been covered with black marker. I held the envelope under the kitchen light and could barely make out a different address beneath the ink. Loveland, Colorado. 30 minutes from Fort Collins. I told myself not to become a suspicious fiancé digging through trash. Then I remembered I was 2 months from marrying someone whose parents did not know me. I took a photograph of the address. I did nothing for 2 days. On Wednesday afternoon, Tessa texted that she had dinner with colleagues. I drove north. The address led to a tidy, split-level house on a street where every third driveway had a basketball hoop. A faded Subaru sat outside. Christmas lights hung halfway across the gutter, clearly abandoned mid-project. A man in his early 60s was standing on a ladder trying to attach the other half. I parked, sat in my truck for 5 full minutes, and felt embarrassed. What was I doing? If Tessa's father was truly cruel, I was violating the boundaries she had trusted me to respect. I almost left. Then the man climbed down, noticed my truck, and waved because he assumed I was looking for an address. I got out. "Are you Martin Morgan?" He looked confused. "Yes. My name is Owen Barrett." "Nothing. I'm engaged to Tessa." The extension cord slipped from his hand. He did not cry. He did something worse. He sat down on the bottom step of the ladder like his knees had stopped working. "Tess?" he said. Then louder, toward the house. "Carol." A woman opened the front door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What?" She saw me. "This is Owen," Martin said. "He says he's engaged to Tess." Carol covered her mouth. I knew before either of them told me anything. Not the details, but I knew I had not arrived at the house of 2 people who wanted their daughter erased. I had arrived at the house of 2 people who had been waiting to hear whether she was alive. Carol invited me inside. Their living room contained Tessa everywhere. School photographs, dance recital pictures, college graduation. A framed family photo from Yellowstone when she was maybe 16. A photograph of Martin and Tessa repainting a bedroom. Another of Carol fastening a corsage onto her wrist before prom. I understood photographs do not prove a family was healthy. Abusive families take pictures too. I reminded myself of that while Carol made coffee with shaking hands. "Does she know you're here?" Martin asked. "No." He nodded slowly. "Then we need to be careful what we tell you." That sentence surprised me. A bitter parent would have unloaded. Martin did not. He started with facts. Tessa had graduated from Colorado State. They paid most of her tuition using savings and a small inheritance from Carol's mother. Martin had been head custodian for the Poudre School District for 34 years. Carol worked as a dental assistant until arthritis forced her to cut back. Tessa moved to Denver after college and began working in marketing. At first, she came home monthly, then less. She began using Lane, her middle name, professionally instead of Morgan. Martin shrugged. "We thought it sounded better for work." The relationship broke after Tessa became engaged to a previous boyfriend 6 years earlier. That wedding never happened, but during planning she asked her parents for $75,000. "We had maybe 120 in retirement outside the house," Carol said. "We could not do it." They offered 12,000. Tessa called it humiliating. The engagement ended for unrelated reasons a few months later, but she never really came back. "She said we made her feel small," Martin told me. "Maybe we did sometimes. I know I said things about spending money that she hated. I know I did not understand her work. But abusive?" He looked genuinely lost. "Maybe she experiences us differently than we experienced ourselves. I'm not going to tell you her feelings are false. I can only tell you what happened from here." That restraint mattered. Carol brought out a plastic storage box. Birthday cards returned unopened. Christmas packages. One envelope contained 2 checks they had sent over several years, uncashed. Another held a letter Tessa returned with, "Please stop contacting me," written across the front. Then Carol placed my wedding invitation on the table, the real one. Opened. "How do you have that?" I asked. "It came 2 weeks ago." The one at my house was returned. She sent that one to the old Fort Collins address. We lived there 3 years ago. My stomach turned. Tessa had provided an outdated address for the invitation, knowing it would return. "Did you know the wedding date?" "Now we do." Carol slid the invitation toward me. "We thought maybe she wanted us there and was afraid to call." Martin said they had written a letter asking what she wanted and mailed it to the return address. It came back unopened 4 days earlier. Our condo address. Tessa had intercepted it. I sat at that table while everything in my future changed shape. "Why would she tell me you were abusive?" Neither answered immediately. Then Martin looked at his hands. "Because I embarrassed her." "How?" By being exactly what I am. He gave a tired smile. I clean schools. Carol said, that is not why. He looked at her. She turned to me. Tessa started moving in circles where everyone's parents were lawyers, doctors, executives. She began introducing Martin as working in facilities management. That was true. Then school operations. Also true. Eventually, she stopped introducing us. Carol's voice broke. At one company holiday dinner, she asked her father not to wear his work jacket because it had the district logo on it. He had come straight from helping clean up a broken pipe. Martin shrugged as though trying to protect his daughter from a story that already hurt. She was young. She was 31, Carol said. The final break came when Tessa asked them to help finance a luxury charity event she was organizing professionally. Martin declined. Tessa told him, "You never understand what it takes to exist in my world." He answered, "If your world only respects you when you spend money you don't have, I don't want much to do with that world." She heard it as judgment. Maybe it was. They fought. Tessa told them they were the reason she felt ashamed of where she came from. Then she blocked them. Carol cried. Martin looked at the wall. I asked the question that scared me most. Has she ever said I exist? Martin looked at Carol. Carol shook her head. No. I showed them a photograph from our engagement. Carol touched the screen with one finger. She looks happy. I thought she was. Maybe she is. Martin looked at me steadily. People can be happy and still be lying. I drove home in silence. I did not confront Tessa that night. Not because I wanted to trap her. Because I needed to understand whether there was a version of the story I was missing. The next few days gave me one. Friday, Tessa announced excitedly that she had huge news. We were making dinner. My parents reached out. I nearly dropped the knife. Really? Yeah, she smiled carefully. I think the wedding invitation shook something loose. What did they say? They apologized. Like actually apologized. My dad admitted he was controlling. Mom admitted she always criticized me. That's big. I know. She hugged me. I stood there with my hands at my sides for 1 second too long. Do they want to come to the wedding? Maybe. I don't know if I'm ready for that, but they want to meet you. When? Next Saturday. Dinner. I looked at her face. No twitch, no hesitation. Where? The Broadmoor Grill. A high-end restaurant inside one of the hotels her company managed. That's quite a drive from Loveland. Her eyes flickered. They're staying downtown. I thought they lived in Fort Collins. They moved near Boulder recently. The lie had become fluid. Addresses changed according to the needs of the sentence. I said, great. She smiled with visible relief. That night I lay awake beside her and understood something I had never wanted to learn. The scariest liar is not someone who invents everything. It is someone who builds lies using real emotions. Tessa probably had felt judged by her parents. She probably had felt embarrassed. She probably had hated Martin's comments about money. Those feelings became foundation stones. Then she built an entirely different house on top of them. Saturday dinner arrived. Tessa introduced me to Douglas and Celeste Warren. I knew Douglas slightly by reputation. He was regional president for the hospitality company where Tessa worked. Celeste chaired several arts boards and appeared regularly in society photographs. They were polished, warm, and clearly uncomfortable beneath the surface. Tessa introduced them without blinking. Owen, this is my dad, Douglas. My mom, Celeste. I shook their hands. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Douglas said, likewise. Dinner began. Tessa created memories as easily as other people created small talk. Dad, remember that hotel in Santa Fe when I was 12? Douglas smiled vaguely. Hard to forget, Celeste asked about my business. Tessa referred to summers at our place in Vail. I knew Martin and Carol had never owned a Vail property. I watched Douglas and Celeste follow her cues. Eventually, I asked Douglas how long he had known Tessa. Almost 9 years, he said. Tessa's hand stopped near her wine glass. Douglas continued. She came into our organization right out of her previous agency. She's like family. Like family, not family. I looked at Tessa. Her smile remained fixed. That's wonderful, I said, because my parents take family seriously too. I invited Douglas and Celeste to a formal engagement dinner at my parents' house the following Saturday. Tessa squeezed my hand beneath the table. Are you sure? Absolutely. Douglas hesitated. Celeste looked at him. Then he said they would be honored. After dinner, Tessa nearly danced through the parking garage. That went perfectly. They seem nice. They are. Your dad didn't say much about childhood. She laughed. He gets awkward about emotional things. Understandable. She kissed me. Thank you for giving them a chance. I drove home thinking about Martin sitting beneath half-finished Christmas lights. Monday, I drove to Loveland again. I told Martin and Carol everything. The Warrens, dinner, the invented memories. Carol cried from embarrassment, not anger. Please don't humiliate her, she said. I don't want to humiliate anyone. Then what do you want? Martin asked. I want the truth in one room before I stand in a church and promise my life to someone. He nodded. Fair. I invited them to the dinner. Carol resisted. She will hate us. She already built a life where you don't exist. Martin put his hand over hers. Maybe it's time we stop helping her do that. My parents learned Tuesday. Dad listened quietly. Mom paced the kitchen. She told me those people abused her. I know. I fed her. I nearly laughed despite everything. Mom, no. Do you understand? I defended her to your aunt when she asked why no relatives were coming. I told everyone not to judge a woman for protecting herself from toxic parents. You were acting on what we knew. And her mother was 40 miles away? 70. That is not better, Dad said. Denise. Mom stopped. What are you going to do, Owen? Have dinner. And after? Depends on what she does when they walk in. Dad nodded slowly. Good. Good? You don't need to know whether she lied. You know that. You need to know what she does with truth. That was exactly it. The engagement dinner happened the Saturday before Christmas at my parents' house. Mom insisted on cooking because she refused to let deception ruin a prime rib she had already ordered. Kendra and her husband came. Dad invited my grandmother. Douglas and Celeste arrived at 6:30 carrying wine. They looked nervous. Tessa arrived with them because she had spent the afternoon at a salon with Celeste. She wore a cream dress and looked happier than I had seen her in weeks. This is what I wanted, she whispered while Mom took coats. Both families together. I nearly broke right there. Both families. We sat. Mom was gracious to Douglas and Celeste, but I could see the effort. Dad asked Douglas how long he had worked in hospitality. Tessa answered for him. Dad's been in hotels forever. Douglas glanced at her. A long time. Grandma asked Celeste what Tessa had been like as a baby. The entire table froze for half a second. Celeste smiled. Strong-willed, I imagine. Grandma laughed. That means she wasn't there. Tessa jumped in. Grandma Ruth, Mom had a difficult delivery and doesn't remember much. My grandmother looked at Tessa, then at me. 88 years of life passed across her face. She knew. She said nothing. Dinner continued. Tessa relaxed again. After dessert, Dad poured coffee. Tessa stood and raised her glass. I just want to say something. My stomach tightened. This year has taught me that family isn't always simple. Sometimes you have to lose people before they understand your value. I'm grateful my parents finally found their way back, and I'm grateful the Barretts showed me what unconditional family looks like while I waited. Celeste looked down. Douglas closed his eyes. My mother's face hardened. I stood. I want to say something too. Tessa smiled at me. Of course. You're right about one thing. Family isn't simple. I took my phone from my pocket and sent a text. Now. Then I looked at Tessa. And sometimes the hardest part isn't forgiving people who hurt you. It's admitting who actually did the hurting. Her smile faltered. The doorbell rang. Tessa turned toward the hallway. Mom did not move. Dad did not move. I walked to the front door myself. Martin and Carol stood on the porch. Martin wore a dark blue suit that fit awkwardly across the shoulders. Carol held a small bakery box with both hands. We didn't know what to bring, she whispered. You didn't have to bring anything. I opened the door wider. Tessa saw them from the dining room. I watched all the color leave her face. The wine glass in her hands shook once. No. The word was barely audible. Carol stopped in the entryway. Hi, Tess. Tessa looked at me. What did you do? Not what are they doing here, what did you do? I went to Loveland. Why? Because the wedding invitation came back from an address you knew was old. She stared at me. You went behind my back. Yes. You had no right. Maybe not, but I'm glad I did. Douglas stood slowly. Tessa. She spun toward him. Don't. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. You told us they were dead. The room became absolutely still. My mother inhaled sharply. Martin looked like someone had struck him. Carol's hand tightened around the bakery box. I looked at Tessa. You told them your parents died? She turned to me, panicked now. It was complicated, Douglas answered for her. She told us they died in a car accident when she was 23. Martin sat down on the bench by the door. Carol whispered, "Oh my God." Tessa pressed both hands to her forehead. Everyone stop. Nobody moved. Please, I can explain. I said, then explain. Not like this. This is the first room where every version of the story is present. You planned this. Yes. You wanted to humiliate me. No. If I wanted humiliation, I would have invited coworkers, friends, cameras. I invited parents. She looked at my mother. Denise, please. Mom's voice was calm. Tell the truth. Tessa's face crumpled. They don't understand my life. Martin closed his eyes. Carol whispered, We tried. Tessa snapped toward her. You tried to keep me small. How? Carol asked. Every time I wanted something, you talked about money. Every time I had friends over, Dad embarrassed me. Every time I tried to reinvent myself, you reminded me where I came from. Martin stood slowly. I worked at schools, Tess. I wore work clothes. Exactly. The cruelty of the word landed before she realized it. Everyone heard it. Martin looked down at his suit. Tessa continued, crying now. Do you know what it's like sitting at dinner with people whose fathers own companies and whose mothers chair foundations, then saying my dad unclogs toilets at a middle school? Martin flinched. Carol covered her mouth. I had never seen shame become uglier than in the moment someone tried to transfer it to a person who had earned none of it. He maintained 6 schools, Carol said quietly. He kept buildings running for thousands of children. That's not how people hear it. Which people? I asked. Tessa looked at me. Your world too, Owen. Don't pretend status doesn't matter. My father spent 15 years mowing lawns. Dad nodded. Still can. Tessa shook her head. But he built something, Martin said. So did I. She turned toward him. What? A life, a retirement, a house, a family. Maybe it wasn't impressive enough for your friends, but your mother and I built it. Tessa began crying harder. You never believed in me. Carol's voice broke. We paid for college. Money is not belief. We went to every award, every graduation, every recital. And then when I needed $75,000 for the wedding, you offered 12. There it was. Dad leaned back. Kendra stared at her plate. Douglas looked disgusted. Tessa hurt herself and tried to recover. It wasn't just the money. No, I said. It was what the money represented to you. She looked at me desperately. Owen, you don't understand. I had spent years building a life. I was finally around people who respected me. I didn't want to walk into that world with parents who questioned everything. So you killed them. She recoiled. What? In your story, you told Douglas and Celeste they were dead. I needed an explanation. You had one. The truth. The truth made me look. She stopped. I waited. Made you look what? Silence. Martin answered for her. Poor. Tessa started sobbing. Carol walked toward her instinctively, then stopped herself. That hurt almost more than anything. A mother whose body still wanted to comfort the daughter who had erased her. Douglas spoke for the first time in several minutes. Why us? Tessa looked at him. What? Why did you ask Celeste and me to pretend? I didn't ask you to pretend to be my biological parents. You introduced me as dad tonight. Because Owen's family is traditional. I needed, Douglas laughed once without humor. Needed what? A better resume at the dinner table? Celeste looked at Carol. She told me she had no mother. Carol's face folded. I'm sorry, Celeste whispered. I would never have agreed if I knew. I know, Carol said. Tessa looked around the room and realized nobody was moving toward her. So everyone is against me, my mother whispered. Do not do that. Tessa stared at her. Mom continued. Accountability is not abandonment just because you are uncomfortable. Tessa turned to me. Say something. I'm trying to decide whether there's anything left to say. You love me. I do. Then don't let one mistake destroy everything. One mistake? One lie. Fine. Several lies. I panicked. For years? You don't know how hard it is to become someone different from where you came from. You didn't become different. You decided the people who loved you made the new version look less impressive. She wiped her face. That's not fair. Neither was telling 2 living people they were dead. The room went silent again. I reached into my pocket and took out the ring box. Tessa stared at it. No, I'm not doing this to punish you. Then don't. I cannot marry someone while wondering whether love lasts only as long as I fit the image she wants. You fit. Today. Owen, what happens if the company struggles? What happens if dad gets sick and needs help? What happens if our child is awkward or ordinary or chooses a life you don't think photographs well? Do you erase people when they embarrass you? I would never do that to our child. Your mother probably thought the same thing when you were born. Carol began crying again. I hated myself for saying it, but it was true. I placed the ring box on the table. The wedding is off. Tessa gripped the back of a chair. You can't decide that tonight. I can decide not to get married. After everything we planned? Plans are not vows. What am I supposed to tell people? The question landed like final evidence. Not how do I fix this? Not how do I make this right with my parents? What do I tell people? I looked at her and felt the relationship end inside me. Tell them the wedding was canceled because I discovered you had lied to me about your family for our entire relationship. You want everyone to hate me? No, you can tell them whatever you want. I'm not making a public announcement beyond saying the wedding is canceled, so you get to look noble. Tessa, stop making this about how the room sees you. She sank into a chair. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Martin walked toward her. I expected anger. He knelt beside her chair. Tess, she would not look at him. I don't understand everything you felt growing up. Maybe I embarrassed you more than I knew. Maybe I talked about money too much. Maybe I made you feel like wanting more meant you didn't appreciate us. If I did that, I'm sorry. Tessa finally looked at him. His eyes were wet. But I will not apologize for being a custodian. I won't let my daughter make me ashamed of honest work. Carol stood beside him. And I will not beg you to love us. Tessa sobbed. Mom. Carol's whole body shook at the word. I have wanted to hear you call me that for 3 years. She closed her eyes, but not if saying it tonight is just because everything else fell apart. That sentence was the strongest thing anyone said. Tessa looked destroyed. I felt compassion, real compassion. That did not restore trust. Douglas and Celeste left first after apologizing to Martin and Carol. Douglas shook my father's hand and said, I wish we had asked more questions. Dad answered, most lies survive because decent people assume there's no reason to investigate them. Tessa stayed at the table. My mother packed food for Martin and Carol because that is how Denise Barrett handles emotional catastrophe. Kendra washed dishes because she did not know what else to do. I went outside onto the back porch and stood in the cold. Dad joined me a few minutes later. You okay? No. Good. I looked at him. Good? Means you loved her. He leaned against the railing. If this felt easy, I'd be worried about you. I keep wondering if I overreacted. You didn't cancel over where her father worked. I know. You canceled because she built your marriage on a false biography and was still lying 10 minutes before the truth walked through the door. She might change. She might. Does that matter? Dad looked toward the house. Maybe to her parents. Maybe to her. It doesn't mean you owe her a wedding while she figures it out. Tessa moved out of my condo the following week. I stayed at Kendra's house while she packed because I did not trust myself not to turn sadness into negotiation. She left a 6-page letter. The first 2 pages explained her childhood. The next 2 explained the social pressure she felt in Denver. Only page 5 contained the sentence I needed. I was ashamed of my parents, and instead of questioning that shame, I punished them for causing it. I believed that sentence. I still did not call. The wedding vendors were surprisingly simple compared with the emotional wreckage. We canceled what could be canceled, absorbed what could not, and divided expenses according to who had paid them. No courtroom, no revenge, no public campaign. When people asked, I said, we discovered serious trust issues and decided not to marry. Tessa posted nothing for almost a month. Then one night she uploaded an old photograph from college. Martin stood beside her in a blue school district work shirt. Carol stood on the other side. The caption read, I spent years thinking becoming successful meant becoming unrecognizable from where I started. I hurt 2 people who never deserved to become evidence of something I was trying to escape. I'm working on repairing that privately. She disabled comments. I respected that. Carol called me in January. I wanted you to know she came home. How did it go? Badly. I almost smiled. Probably more honest that way. She cried. Martin yelled. I yelled. She left, then came back the next Sunday. That sounds like family. Carol laughed softly. Maybe. She thanked me for knocking on their door. I told her I was sorry for the way the truth came out. "Don't be," she said. "We spent years thinking our daughter hated us. Now at least we know she hated what we represented to herself. That's painful, but it's something a person can work on." Martin emailed me once. 3 sentences. "You did right by yourself. Don't let guilt rewrite that. If our daughter becomes the woman you thought she was, I hope she becomes that woman for herself first." I kept the email. My mother kept contact with Carol for a while, mostly exchanging recipes and complaints about adult children. I asked Mom not to report on Tessa unless it directly involved me. Boundaries work better when you stop collecting updates that keep emotional doors half open. 6 months later, Tessa emailed, "I'm not asking for another chance. I want to apologize without using the apology as a key." That line made me read the rest. She had started counseling. She had corrected the story with several friends and colleagues. Douglas and Celeste had forgiven her privately, but no longer treated her like family. She visited her parents twice a month. She admitted she had spent years interpreting every limit from them as proof they did not believe in her because she had equated expensive support with pride. I thought if my parents looked impressive, I would feel impressive. When they didn't fit the person I was trying to become, I treated them like an old address I could stop using. The email ended, "You were right to leave. I hate that sentence, but it's true." I answered 1 week later, "I hope the work you're doing gives you peace. I forgive you. I'm not reopening the relationship." Then I closed the laptop and went to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. That distinction became one of the most important lessons of my life. Forgiveness is not always an invitation. Sometimes forgiveness means I no longer need someone to suffer before I can move forward. Reconciliation is different. Reconciliation requires a relationship sturdy enough to carry what happened. Ours was not. A year after the canceled wedding, I attended a fundraiser at the same downtown hotel where I first met Tessa. I knew she might be there. She was. We saw each other across the room. For one strange second, 14 months of memories returned at once. Her laughing with Mom, hiking Telluride. Sunday dinners, the ring, the restaurant, Martin's blue work shirt in that Instagram photograph. Tessa walked over. "Hi, hi." She looked different, not visually. Less polished somehow, although she was dressed beautifully. Maybe she was simply no longer performing for me. "How are your parents?" I asked. She smiled. "Annoying." "Good. Dad keeps trying to send me home with leftover chili." "That sounds dangerous." Mom joined Facebook and comments on everything I post. "My condolences." We both laughed. Then she became serious. "I'm sorry." "I know. I'm still sorry." "I know that too." "Are you happy?" I thought about the question. "Yeah." "Good." She nodded, eyes wet. "You deserve that. So do you." We hugged once, briefly. Then we walked in opposite directions. I did not spend the evening wondering whether I had made a mistake. That surprised me. For months after the breakup, I had wondered whether true love meant staying while someone changed. Now I understood that love is not proved by volunteering to become someone's rehabilitation program. Tessa needed to repair her relationship with truth before she could build anything healthy with anyone. I needed to repair something too. My belief that because I came from a close family, I could recognize healthy family dynamics automatically. I had accepted her story partly because it made me feel virtuous. I was the man who would never force an estranged daughter to reconcile with toxic parents. That instinct was good. The certainty was not. People can misuse the language of boundaries just as easily as they misuse the language of family. Toxic can describe real harm, and it can also become a convenient label when someone wants to avoid accountability. The answer is not to distrust every person who is estranged from relatives. The answer is to understand that marriage asks for honesty about the life you are bringing into it. Tessa was allowed to never speak to Martin and Carol again if that was what she truly needed. What she was not allowed to do was create dead parents, substitute wealthy ones, invent apologies, and ask me to make vows inside a story she knew was false. Today, Martin still works part-time at the school district because retirement bored him. Carol sends my mother Christmas cards. Tessa and I do not speak beyond the occasional polite message. I eventually began dating again, slower this time. My family learned something too. Uncle David no longer asks new girlfriends where their people are during the first meal, which I consider major cultural progress. Dad still asks questions. Mom still feeds everyone. Kendra still tells embarrassing stories. Sunday dinner remains mandatory whenever possible. But the phrase, family comes first, means something more careful to me now. Family should come first when family behaves like family. Blood does not excuse cruelty. Estrangement does not automatically prove cruelty. Wealth does not make people worthy. Modest work does not make anyone embarrassing. And love should never require another human being to shrink their history so you can feel taller beside it. The image I remember most is not Tessa's face when her parents walked through the door. It is Martin sitting beneath half-hung Christmas lights after I introduced myself. He had spent years believing his daughter wanted him gone because he had failed her somehow. In reality, his greatest offense was representing a version of her life she had decided was not impressive enough. No parent should have to apologize for honest work because a child climbed into a room where titles mattered more. And no fiancé should discover 3 weeks before a wedding that the person beside him has been editing human beings out of her biography. Walking away did not make me strong because it hurt Tessa. It made me strong because I finally understood that love and trust are not interchangeable. I loved her when I canceled the wedding. I may always love some version of the woman I thought she was. But self-worth meant refusing to stand at an altar, hoping honesty would begin after the vows. So tell me honestly, if the person you plan to marry admitted they had erased loving working-class parents out of shame, told everyone those parents were abusive or dead, and recruited wealthy mentors to play their roles at your wedding, would genuine remorse and years of changed behavior ever make you give that relationship another chance? Or would the lie itself permanently end the future you had planned together?